First contact terror. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, silent and cold, until a strange anomaly appeared on the long-range scanners of the Kalian Alliance's border outpost. Commander Thera Vex stood on the command deck of the Celestial Sentinel, her four-fingered hands clasped behind her back as she studied the visual feed. The object was approaching their territory at an alarming speed, its design unlike anything recorded in their extensive databases. "Magnify," she ordered, her voice calm despite the unease spreading through her chest. The screen shimmered, and the image of the unknown vessel grew clearer. It was massive, at least twice the size of the Sentinel, with sharp angles and what appeared to be weapon ports dotting its hull. The ship was dark, almost black, with red markings along its side that resembled no language Thera had ever encountered. "Status report," she demanded, turning to her second-in-command, Krell. "Vessel is maintaining course toward the Lyra sector. No response to our hails. Energy readings are unusual, Commander. Power signatures don't match any known civilization in the Alliance database." Krell's voice faltered. "It's generating more power than our entire fleet combined." Thera felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The Kalian Alliance had stood unchallenged for centuries, their technological superiority ensuring peace across 12 star systems. Yet here was something unexpected, something powerful, heading straight for their most populated sector. "Alert the Council and deploy reconnaissance drones. I want visual confirmation of its intentions before we engage." She kept her voice steady, aware that her crew was watching. Fear was contagious, and right now, she needed clear heads. As the drones approached the mysterious vessel, a new alert sounded. "Commander, the ship is accelerating. It's changing direction toward us." The young officer at the tactical station looked up, his scaled face pale with fear. "Raise shields. Prepare defensive positions," Thera ordered, watching as the massive ship grew larger on their view screen. "And keep trying those hails. If they can communicate, I want to know what they want." The response came not in words, but in action. The unknown vessel suddenly flared with light, and an energy beam shot across space, narrowly missing the Sentinel. The ship shuddered from the proximity of the blast. "That was a warning shot," Krell whispered, his voice choked with disbelief. "If they'd wanted to hit us." "All ships, defensive formation," Thera commanded. "Prepare to engage, but do not fire unless fired upon directly. We need to understand what we're dealing with." The Alliance fleet, 5 ships strong, moved into position around the Sentinel. They were the pride of Kalian engineering, each capable of destroying a small moon. Yet as the dark ship approached, Thera couldn't shake the feeling that they were suddenly outmatched. A new alert sounded, and a communication request appeared on the main screen. "Accept it," Thera said, straightening her posture. The screen flickered, and for the first time in recorded history, the Kalian Alliance came face to face with a human. The creature had tanned skin, black hair pulled back tightly, and eyes as dark as space itself. It wore a uniform of deep blue with insignias Thera couldn't decipher. "This is Captain Elena Reyes of the Earth Warship Vindication." The creature spoke, its voice translated by the ship's systems. "You have entered restricted space. State your intentions." Thera blinked in confusion. "This is Commander Thera Vex of the Kalian Alliance. You are approaching Kalian territory. It is you who must state your intentions." The human's expression hardened. "We have no record of the Kalian Alliance. This sector has been claimed by Earth under the Artemis Protocol. Your presence here is unauthorized." A murmur spread through the command deck. No species had ever claimed to not know of the Alliance. They were the dominant power in this part of the galaxy, their influence spanning generations. "This sector has been under Kalian protection for over 300 cycles," Thera replied, fighting to keep her voice diplomatic. "Perhaps your navigation systems are in error. We can provide correct coordinates." "Our navigation is functioning perfectly," Captain Reyes interrupted. "The Earth has claimed this sector and 6 others surrounding it. We suggest you withdraw your vessels immediately. Krill leaned close to Thera's ear. Commander, preliminary scans show their weapons systems are unlike anything we've encountered. Energy signatures suggest destructive capabilities beyond our defensive measures. Thera nodded slightly, never taking her eyes off the human captain. Captain Rice, there seems to be a misunderstanding. We welcome diplomatic discussions with your species, but we cannot simply withdraw from our own territory. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting of representatives to discuss this claim you've made. The human's face remained impassive. The time for diplomacy has passed. Humanity has suffered enough at the hands of those who speak of peace while preparing for war. You have 30 minutes to withdraw your vessels. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the command deck in stunned silence. What just happened? One of the officers whispered. Thera turned to her tactical officer. Contact the Council immediately. Inform them we've made first contact with a previously unknown species called humans who possess advanced weaponry and are making territorial claims. As the officer hurried to comply, Krell approached. Commander, what are your orders? Do we withdraw? Thera stared at the massive ship on the view screen. The Kalian Alliance had never backed down from a challenge, never surrendered territory. Their dominance was built on the understanding that they would always defend what was theirs. No, she said finally. We stand our ground, but we do not provoke. Maintain defensive positions and continue attempts at communication. Perhaps they can be reasoned with. The next 29 minutes passed in tense silence. The human ship, the Vindication, remained motionless, its dark hull reflecting the distant starlight. 1 minute remaining on their ultimatum. Commander, Krell reported. Thera nodded. Open a channel. The screen remained dark. No response. They're ignoring our hails, the communications officer reported. 30 minutes have elapsed, Krell said quietly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the human ship began to change. Panels shifted, revealing weapon ports that glowed with an ominous blue light. Energy spike detected, shouted the tactical officer. There. The rest of his words were drowned out as a brilliant beam of energy shot from the Vindication, slicing through one of the Alliance ships as if it were made of paper. The vessel didn't explode. It simply came apart, its pieces drifting silently into space. Evasive maneuvers, Thera shouted. Return fire. The Alliance fleet scattered, weapons firing at the human vessel. Their shocks were absorbed by some kind of shield, ripples of energy spreading across an invisible barrier surrounding the Vindication. Our weapons are having no effect, Krell reported, his voice tight with fear. Another beam lanced out from the human ship, catching the edge of the Sentinel. Alarms blared as systems failed across the ship. Hull breach on decks 6 through 9. Sealing emergency bulkheads. Thera gripped the command console, watching in horror as a third Alliance ship was torn apart by the human weapons. They had faced conflicts before, border disputes and pirate raids, but nothing like this. Nothing so efficient. Commander, we need to retreat, Krell urged. We're outmatched. Pride warred with reason in Thera's mind. The Alliance had never retreated, never surrendered. But they had never faced a threat like this. All ships, fall back to defensive position Alpha, she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. We need to regroup and... A massive explosion rocked the Sentinel, throwing Thera to the floor. When she regained her feet, half the command deck was in ruins, crew members injured or worse. Direct hit to our primary engines, a surviving officer reported. We're dead in space. On the view screen, the human ship approached, unstoppable and terrifying in its precision. The remaining Alliance ships attempted to provide cover, but their weapons seemed useless against the Vindication's defenses. Commander, Krell said quietly, we should prepare to abandon ship. Before Thera could respond, the communication system crackled to life. This is Captain Rice. Your ships are disabled. Your defenses have failed. You were warned. The human's face appeared on screen, still calm, still coldly efficient. The Kalian Alliance has now been introduced to humanity. Remember this day. Remember what happens when you stand against us. Thera stood tall, facing the screen. Why are you doing this? We have no quarrel with your people. We didn't even know of your existence until today. Something flickered across Captain Rice's face. Emotion, perhaps, breaking through that rigid control. Your ignorance doesn't absolve you. For centuries, species like yours have ruled the stars, dividing territories, imposing your will on worlds you deemed lesser. Humanity will not be another footnote in your history. We will write our own. The screen went dark, and Thera turned to her crew. Prepare emergency protocols. All personnel to escape pods. As the crew hurried to comply, Thera remained on the bridge, watching the massive human ship through the viewscreen. In all her years commanding Kalian forces, she had never imagined a scenario like this. A single ship decimating their fleet, a species appearing from nowhere with technology that made theirs look primitive. The galaxy had changed in the span of an hour. The Kalian Alliance, for the first time in its long history, had met something it couldn't conquer or control. And as Thera finally made her way to the escape pod, one thought burned in her mind. This was only the beginning. The echoes of human resolve. The Kalian High Council chamber was filled with angry voices, a cacophony of fear and indignation that echoed against the ancient stone walls. Thera Vex stood in the center of the circular room, her uniform still bearing scorch marks from the battle, as she delivered her report to the 17 council members. 3 ships destroyed, 2 severely damaged, and 42 lives lost. She concluded, her voice hollow. The human vessel sustained no apparent damage despite our best efforts. High Counselor Mavis, the eldest of the Kalian leadership, leaned forward, her age-spotted hands trembling slightly. And you're certain they called themselves humans? There is no record of such a species in our archives. Yes, Counselor. They identify themselves as from Earth. Their technology is unlike anything we've encountered. Weapons that can cut through our strongest shields, defenses that render our attacks useless. Thera paused, gathering her courage. Honorable Council, we are not prepared for this threat. A murmur ran through the chamber. The Kalian Alliance had not faced a superior force in living memory. Their technological advancement had always ensured their dominance. Perhaps, offered Counselor Jurel, we should consider a diplomatic approach. If their technology is as advanced as Commander Vex suggests, they could be valuable allies rather than enemies. Counselor Dren slammed his fist on the table. Diplomacy. After they destroyed our ships without provocation, we must gather the full might of the Alliance fleet and show these humans that we will not be intimidated. The argument might have continued indefinitely had the chamber doors not burst open. A young aide rushed in, face pale with urgency. Counselors, the human ship has entered orbit around Kalia Prime. Silence fell over the chamber like a shroud. They followed the escape pods to our homeworld. Thera whispered, horror washing over her. High Counselor Mavis rose slowly to her feet. Send a communication. Tell them we wish to speak. Captain Alina Reyes stood on the bridge of the Vindication, looking down at the blue-green world of Kalia Prime through the viewscreen. It was beautiful, reminiscent of Earth before the Great Collapse, before humanity had been forced to look to the stars not for exploration but for survival. They're hailing us, Captain, Lieutenant Park reported from the communication station. Put them through, Elena ordered, straightening her uniform. The screen flickered, revealing a group of Kalians, their scaled skin reflecting the light of their council chamber. At their center stood an elderly female, her bearing regal despite the fear evident in her eyes. I am High Counselor Mavis of the Kalian Alliance, she began, her translated voice steady. You have entered orbit around our homeworld after an unprovoked attack on our vessels. We demand an explanation. Elena allowed herself a small, cold smile. Demand? You are not in a position to demand anything, Counselor, but I will offer an explanation nonetheless. for the sake of whatever comes next. She gestured, and the view screen split, showing the Vindication on one side and a view of Earth on the other, a once blue planet now gray and lifeless. This was Earth 300 of your cycles ago. Alina continued. Home to billions of humans, a world of oceans and forests and life. Until the harvester ships came. The Kalian Council members exchanged confused glances. We had just begun our journey into space, Alina said, her voice growing tight with controlled emotion. We weren't a threat to anyone, but we had something valuable. A planet rich with resources and a species naive enough to be exploited. The ships came without warning, without communication. They began stripping our world, taking what they wanted, killing those who resisted. Captain Reyes. Mavis interrupted. We know nothing of these harvesters. The Kalian Alliance has never. The harvesters wore your insignia, Counselor. Alina cut in. The same mark that adorns your ships, your uniforms. Perhaps you didn't send them directly. Perhaps they were rogue elements or corporate interests. But they came from your alliance, and when the survivors of Earth tried to contact the Kalian government for help, for justice, we were ignored. Murmurs spread through the council chamber. Impossible, one counselor muttered. We would never authorize. Humanity nearly perished. Alina continued, ignoring the interruption. But we survived. We rebuilt. And while the Alliance expanded across the stars, secure in your superiority, we prepared. We studied your technology from the debris left behind. We improved upon it. And we swore that we would never again be victims. Thera stepped forward, her expression troubled. Captain, if what you say is true, it is a grave injustice. But the actions of the past should not condemn the present. The council members before you had nothing to do with these events. Perhaps not personally, Alina conceded, but your civilization profited from them. Your expansion was built on the resources stripped from worlds like ours. Your peace was secured while we struggled to survive. What do you want from us? Mavis asked quietly. Alina's expression hardened. Recognition. Acknowledgement of what was done to Earth. Reparations for the damage caused. And a reassessment of your borders. The sectors we've claimed will remain under human protection. The council chamber erupted in protests, but Mavis raised a hand, silencing them. And if we refuse these terms? In answer, Alina nodded to her tactical officer. A moment later, a beam of energy shot from the Vindication, striking the small, uninhabited moon orbiting Kelia Prime. The celestial body shuddered, then began to break apart, fragments drifting into space. That was at 10% capacity, Alina said calmly. The Vindication can reduce your world to rubble, but unlike the harvesters who came to Earth, we give you a choice. Silence fell over the council chamber. The Kalians stared at the screen, at the human captain who held their fate in her hands, and at the fragmenting moon that demonstrated her power. After a long moment, Mavis spoke. We will need time to consider your claims, to search our records for evidence of these events. You have 24 hours, Alina replied. I suggest you use them wisely. As the communication ended, Lieutenant Park approached Alina. Captain, do you think they'll agree to our terms? Alina's gaze remained fixed on the planet below. They'll agree. They have no choice. But this is just the beginning. The Alliance must learn that the galaxy no longer belongs to them alone. Thera Vex stood alone in the archives, surrounded by holographic displays showing records from 3 centuries past. She had been searching for hours, digging through mission logs, resource acquisition reports, corporate charters, anything that might confirm or deny the human captain's accusations. And she had found it. Evidence buried deep in classified files, records of exploratory missions to an uninhabited resource world that matched Earth's coordinates, reports of indigenous resistance and necessary force, corporate profits and political contributions that followed, and finally, a small notation about a communication from survivors, dismissed as not credible and not worthy of council attention. It had all happened, just as Captain Rice had said, and the Alliance had turned a blind eye. With a heavy heart, Thera made her way to the emergency council session. The chamber was tense, councilors speaking in hushed tones that fell silent as she entered. "Commander Vex," Mavis acknowledged, "have you found anything of relevance?" Thera placed a data crystal on the central table. "Everything the human captain said is true. The Alliance, or at least corporations operating under Alliance authorization, stripped their world and ignored their pleas for help." A stunned silence followed her words. "This changes nothing," Councillor Dren insisted. "One ship cannot dictate terms to the entire Alliance. We should gather our fleet and—" "And what?" Thera interrupted. "Did you not see what they did to our most advanced ships? To the moon. This isn't about pride or power anymore. This is about survival." Mavis sighed deeply. "Commander Vex is right. We cannot win this fight. Not now. And more importantly, we are in the wrong." The admission hung in the air, heavy with 3 centuries of comfortable ignorance shattered in a single day. "So we simply surrender?" another councillor asked. "We negotiate," Mavis corrected. "We acknowledge our past and work toward a future. It's the only way forward." When Captain Alina Reyes transported down to the surface of Kalia Prime, she came alone and unarmed, a gesture of good faith that surprised the Kalian leadership. The treaty signing ceremony was broadcast across the Alliance, a historic moment witnessed by billions. "Today marks a new chapter," High Councillor Mavis declared, "one of acknowledgement, of responsibility, and of cooperation. The terms were fair, if humbling for the Alliance. Recognition of human sovereignty over the claimed sectors, reparations in the form of technology sharing and resources, a formal apology for the devastation of Earth, and a promise for joint investigation into other potential victims of Alliance expansion." As Elena signed the treaty, she caught Thera's eye across the chamber. "Commander Vex," she said later, when the formalities were complete, "your voice was instrumental in bringing us to this moment." Thera inclined her head. "I only sought the truth, Captain. Though I admit, the truth was harder to face than I anticipated." "It often is," Elena agreed. "My ancestors would have preferred vengeance, I think. But humanity has learned that survival requires more than just power. It requires wisdom." "Will there be more ships like the Vindication?" Thera asked. Elena smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "There are already dozens, but they don't all have to be weapons. Some could be bridges between our peoples." Thera considered this. "The Council has asked me to serve as liaison to Earth, if you're amenable, Captain." "I think that would be appropriate," Elena nodded. "The galaxy is changing, Commander Vex. The Alliance is no longer the only power among the stars, but that doesn't mean we must be enemies." As they looked out over the Kalian capital, the Vindication visible in the evening sky above, Thera reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Fear had gripped the stars when the human warship arrived, but perhaps what would follow wasn't destruction but transformation. The Kalian Alliance had ruled unchallenged for too long, grown complacent in their power. Now they faced a species that had endured the worst and emerged stronger, more determined, and unwilling to be ignored. "Your people will adapt," Elena said, seemingly reading Thera's thoughts. "Mine did, when we had no choice." "And the rest of the galaxy?" Thera asked. Elena's expression grew distant. "They'll learn what the Alliance has learned today. Humanity has arrived, and we will never be victims again." In the growing darkness, the human warship gleamed like a promise, or a warning, to all who looked upon it. The stars had shifted their allegiance, and the galaxy would never be the same.